Welcome everyone to this Privacy Rules webinar. Today we are going to discuss about unboxing ransomware incident with a team of Privacy Rules experts. I'm very pleased to say that they are all members of our team, and we are going to discuss about a very specific topic, that is one related to how to deal with ransomware under various different point of views that are the legal one, the cybersecurity one, and also the communication one. I would like to thank all our speakers for being with us and all the listeners for joining us today. And I'm going to give the word to Ruben Roex. Ruben is an attorney at Timelex, a niche law firm based in Brussels that assists clients in the public and private sector, both in Belgium and also abroad. And it touches all legal matters related to information technology and innovation in the broad sense. Ruben has, of course, an extensive experience in handling cybercrime and cybersecurity cases, and regularly advises on data management protection topics. And Ruben, I turn it over to you. I thank you very much for moderating this the discussion of today, and again, welcome everyone to this webinar.
All right, thank you, Alessandro. Hi, everyone. A warm welcome from my side as well. Very pleased to see that so many people are joining. We think that we have a very interesting and very hot webinar for you today. Ransomware is still very prevalent, especially now during the COVID crisis. So we saw it as a real opportunity to shed some light on this topic. Because we've seen, we are in our own practice, but I think that goes for all the speakers in the panel today. We've all seen that many organizations and companies still struggle to deal with these sort of attacks. So we thought it was a good idea to sort of unbox ransomware incidents and explain how to deal with those incidents. For our common understanding, ransomware is a very specific type of attack, whereby your attackers send malware to a victim with the intent of encrypting the files and then extorting a ransom from those same victims. Ransomware can be sent to the victim in a number of different ways. Often, in most cases, the perpetrators use the email, so mail spam, but they can also use attacks through drive-by downloads and other channels through which the ransomware ultimately ends up on the victim's systems. So I think it's clear that ransomware attacks are always a bit different from one another. No case is the same. And it always requires a tailored approach. So it's not an easy thing to deal with anyhow, which is why I'm very happy that today we have speakers with very different backgrounds who can all from their own angle shed some light on how to deal with a rather complicated incident such as ransomware. And we're going to follow a logic here. So first we'll be hearing from Simon Wiseman from DeepSecure, who will go into the more preventive side on how to prevent ransomware attacks. Then next we'll have Mitch Koczerginski, who'll deal with the legal aspects of handling a ransomware attack when it actually happens. And lastly, we'll have Christina Forsgård, who will explain a bit more on how to deal from a communication angle with these types of attacks. We'll have a 45-minute block reserved for the presentations of our speakers. And then at the end, we'll have a 15-minute Q&A where we're happy to open up the floor to you, to the audience, and let you ask your questions to our speakers today. Okay, but that's all for me. Now I'm going to pass the word to our first speaker, which is Dr. Simon Wiseman. Simon is the Chief Technology Officer at DeepSecure, a specialist cybersecurity company based in the UK, whose roots are in the defense and intelligence market. Simon has had a long career in the scientific civil service, working on computer security research and development. So Simon, over to you.
Thank you very much. Okay, here we go. So I'm going to talk about the technical side of ransomware, but without being particularly technical. We're going to look at what ransomware is about and why it's hitting the headlines. I'm not going to talk about how to recover from it, though, not in any detail, because my thesis is you should take proper measures to stop it, but be prepared for the things going wrong. So let's take a start by looking at what we're up against. So first off, let's be sure what malware is. So malware is software that just does you no good. If you run it, it might steal valuable information, or it might corrupt your important data. It might hijack expensive resources, or generally disrupt your business processes. Now, ransomware is a kind of malware, but it is a little bit special. What it does is put your system out of action until you pay a ransom. And typically it does this by encrypting all the data it can find, which renders it useless to you. And then you're made to pay for the key to decrypt the data to get it back. But what makes it special? What makes it special is it's actually an easy way for attackers to make money. If you think about it, to steal information from you, the attacker has to break into your system, find ways of getting the necessary privileges to access all your data. They then have to search for the valuable bits without being noticed, and then exfiltrate that past defenses that are looking for leaks. And that's actually hard work. You've got to go to all that trouble, and at the end of it, you still have to find a buyer for the information to actually make money out of it. So difficult stuff. Ransomware is just so much simpler. All you got to do is get in, access any file store you can find, and encrypt the data there. There's no need to work out whether the data is valuable or not. You just encrypt a lot. And then once you've done that, set up your Bitcoin wallet, leave a ransom note, and sit back and relax. And that's easy money by comparison to other attacks. And I think that's why it's just so popular these days. So the burning question then is, can you detect the ransomware before it does any harm? Now, ransomware is just malware. So we're really asking, can anti-malware defenses detect that ransomware before it's too late? Now, most anti-malware defenses, they all work the same way. They look for malware in data. And if they find any, they block your access to that data so you don't hurt yourself. Now, some of these products will work by looking for patterns in data that are characteristic of no malware. And that's what the traditional antivirus scanning is about. And there are others that work by executing the data or opening it up in the appropriate application. And then they watch what happens next. Now, this is sandboxing. If the data does something suspicious or unsafe, then you block the data. Otherwise, after a bit, you let it in and deliver it. Now, that's all good stuff as long as the malware you're facing is actually well known. But it's no good if it's new malware, because none of those defenses recognize it to start with. So if you're hit, if you're the malware's first victim, it's tough luck. You'll be hit by that malware and you'll be taken down because your defenses don't recognize it. But look, the only bright side is that at least your sacrifice is not in vain, because once the attack is revealed, the malware vendors will figure out what to look for next. They'll update their products and their other customers will be protected from then on. It's just a shame that you had to sacrifice yourself for their greater good. Now, that wouldn't be so bad if it wasn't for the fact that even trivial changes to malware can make it look new. And the bad guys are pretty good at doing this to evade detection. I mean, they've had years of practice and they keep on winning. So it's very difficult to stop malware just by detecting it, because it's easy to evade detection. So what happens if you are the first to receive this ransomware? It gets through, you're hit by this ransomware. What do you do next? Well, if you don't want to pay the ransom, it's actually pretty hard to recover. Sometimes the bad guys will make mistakes, and then if you've got the resources of GCHQ behind you, you can go and recover the key and get your data back. But usually it's a matter of shutting your systems down, rebuilding them, and then retrieving the data from backups. And actually none of that's simple. You really don't want to do that. Now, even if you do pay the ransom, and the other folks will be discussing the, the legality and ethics and so on of doing that. But if you do pay up, perhaps you may not be any better off, because firstly, there's no guarantee you'll get a key in return. After all, you're dealing with criminals, so you can't trust them. And if you do get a key, you've got to then go and apply it. And that might be easier said than done. If you shut all your systems down in response to the initial attack, you've got trouble applying this key you've bought to recover the data. So nothing simple. But either way, let's suppose you get your system back. But you have to think carefully here. What exactly have you got? Can you be sure it's the same system that you had before the attack? I mean, the attackers have no scruples. And they might not be as lazy as I perhaps first made out, because they could have left you some unwanted additional presence in the form of some more malware tucked into the remnants of your system and or into the backups that you've recovered from. And this could be more ransomware that gets you again, or a hidden backdoor into your system that they then sell on to somebody else to exploit later. All sorts of possibilities. So basically, the bad guys have been all over your data, and you really can't trust it any longer. And this gives you a bigger challenge than the initial ransomware problem, because you've got to clean up all your data. And that's why just having good backups isn't enough. You've got to also be able to handle this cleanup of the data. So doesn't sound good, does it? You've heard me say that we can't detect ransomware with any certainty, and recovering from an attack is really hard. So I hear you ask, does that mean we have to accept it as a cost of doing business online? Do we sit back, just like retailers take a shrinkage as a fact of life? Well, I don't think so. It is true that you can't detect malware reliably, but that doesn't mean to say you can't stop it. It's just that you have to do something different that doesn't involve the detection of malware. So you need a way of removing the malware without having to first detect it. But given the ubiquitous nature of antivirus and sandboxing, it's just everywhere, which are both trying to do detection. It perhaps comes as a surprise to most people that this can be done. But yeah, there is a way of doing this, and we call it threat removal. So I'll just go into that in a little bit. We can have the next slide. Okay, so threat removal is a way of stopping malware without detecting it. It's turning the problem on its head. So rather than looking for the malware to block it, the data is pulled apart and the useful business information that it's carrying is pulled out. And the data is thrown away. Now, the malware lives in the data. It doesn't live in the information, it doesn't live in what you see on the screen. It's in the data that's carrying that. So by pulling the text and graphics and the information you need out, and throwing everything away, we get rid of the malware, whether it's there or not. Now, we don't, in effect, we don't trust ourselves to tell the difference between safe data and unsafe data, between ordinary data and malware. We just assume that all data is going to be bad and throw it all away. But we've kept that information that you want. And we then build new data to carry the information and deliver it to you so you can use it. This new data doesn't rely on any of the original, so the attacker has no way of getting the malware into what gets delivered. The malware is just removed from the picture. So by doing this, we give the business the information it needs, but the attacker can't deliver malware to the target. And we do this to all data. We're not making any decisions, so there's nothing for the attacker to evade. But we've no idea whether we've stopped any malware or not. We know we have stopped it all, but we don't know how many instances there were. But why should you care as long as you're safe? What you get is safe. That we do know. Okay, so the next slide, I'll just touch on that a little bit more. So for most people, this is a new idea. It's quite radical idea. The technique was originally developed to protect, really sensitive government systems from really sophisticated attackers. But these days, what the attacks that are hitting mainstream commerce are the same kind of attacks that were hitting government a year or so ago. So we need the same kind of techniques to apply more widely. But I guess you're thinking, hey, look, this guy's talking about really special government technologies, which means it's going to be enormously expensive. It's going to be slow, clunky for the users, and just, you know, generally grim. Well, in the past that would have been true, but things have changed. Government is online, and it's got the same business imperatives as industry. It really does care about TCO, total cost of ownership, the performance and the quality experience. All these things really do matter now. And so, although we're traditionally in that market, we've had to respond and produce products and services that really actually do, you know, if you like, work properly. And more than that, the technology has to be easy to insert. So our products can be slotted into your existing mail, web, file transfer gateways to intercept the malware, the ransomware at that point. And it keeps it out, you know, whether you're on premise or in the cloud, which is what, you know, you need that flexibility these days. So really, you know, if you're worried about ransomware, I think you shouldn't try and detect it. You should just remove it. So finally, I'll just wrap up there because I've finished now. So just the takeaway point, really. Just remember, I think there is another way. You don't just have to accept that the attackers will keep winning. You can keep them out. And it's important to put that into the wider strategy, but don't assume that they're going to get in and that your life is going to be a misery. Let's keep them out and then make sure we're ready in the unfortunate event that they do manage to break in, rather than accepting it as routine. So I'm happy to take questions at the end, but if you really want to find out more at your leisure, just visit deepsecure.com. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Simon. I think that was a very good start for our webinar with a very interesting and quite an alternative approach to fighting ransomware. So thank you for that. For our next speaker, we go to Mitch. Mitch has a strong background in privacy law. He advises and represents clients in connection with privacy and data breaches involving payment card information, personal information, health information, and sensitive business information. Mitch also handles submissions to provincial privacy commissioners, as well as the Privacy Commissioner of Canada, on a variety of matters, including breach reporting and access to information appeals. And Mitch, I think you'll be explaining us the legal aspects of ransomware attacks, right?
That's right, Ruben. Thank you.
All right, moving to you.
Hi, everyone. And I just wanted to quickly thank everybody for joining us today. As Ruben mentioned, I'm Mitch Koczerginski. I'm a Canadian litigation and data privacy lawyer. I'm based in Toronto at a firm called McMillan. Now, like many of my fellow panelists, and I'm sure many of you in the audience, I've been devoting an increasingly large amount of my practice to assisting my clients in all sorts of data breaches, including with greater frequency ransomware attacks. Now, in my experience, one of the key differences between a ransomware attack and most other kinds of data breaches is that with ransomware attacks, there's a high degree of certainty that you're dealing with a bad actor or malicious intent. As we've just discussed in the last presentation, you're dealing with criminals in this case. So it's for this reason that ransomware attacks instantly put victims into a state of panic. Unfortunately, a state of panic is not always when we are in our best mindset to make important decisions, but this is precisely the time that it's critical to make those important decisions and to make them quickly. For example, do you report the incident to privacy regulators? Do you notify potentially affected individuals or businesses about what's happened? Do you pay the ransom? What you do and when you do it can have significant legal implications down the road. And to make matters worse, victims often must make these decisions before developing a full understanding of everything that's happened. So during these next few minutes, I want to walk through what I think are some of the key legal considerations that arise when responding to ransomware attacks. And I'm going to organize my thoughts into the following general subtopics that you can see on your screen now. So first, I'm going to talk about the time crunch, and then I'll discuss legal issues with making ransomware payments. I'll discuss legal notice and reporting obligations that may apply in your jurisdiction, and then issues surrounding legal privilege over communications about the incident. And then lastly, I'm going to speak about managing litigation risk that arises when dealing with a ransomware incident. So first, I'm going to discuss the time crunch. And now the first consideration is not really a legal issue at all, but the time crunch can be a key driver to critical legal issues that you may face down the road. And specifically, I want to talk about the dangerously small amount of time that a ransomware victim typically has to make important strategic decisions about how to deal with an attack. This time pressure may arise from a variety of sources, including the desire to take steps to reduce the possible harm to your systems, or to personal information of individuals, or even confidential business information that may be affected by the attack. It may also arise from the time period in which to respond to a threat actor's ransom demand. And it could also arise from the time limits imposed under applicable laws and legal requirements to act swiftly. Now, ransomware attacks also have a funny tendency to occur at the least opportune times when organizations are least prepared to deal with them. And in this regard, think late at night on Christmas Eve, for example. Now, notwithstanding the limited time to make decisions in the circumstances, what you decide to do or what you decide not to do can have significant legal and practical consequences down the road for you or your organization. Moreover, your decisions may potentially be dissected weeks or months later by privacy regulators, courts, or even law enforcement with little sympathy, if any, for the fact that you made them in a state of panic. Now, it's for this reason that I want to emphasize the importance of planning for a ransomware attack before it starts. Now, we've probably all heard this cliche before, that it's not a question about if an attack will happen, it's really just a question about when it will happen. And this, unfortunately, couldn't be more true. Planning for an attack includes keeping a list of emails and phone numbers for professionals who can help guide you through applicable legal requirements, who can help secure your network, and can help you devise an effective communication strategy regarding the attack. Now, while responding to a ransomware attack requires quick decision-making, having the right people available to you in the right time will enable you to make the correct decisions when met with those tight timelines. Next, I'm going to discuss legal issues with making ransomware payments. And I'm just going to touch upon this briefly in the interest of time. So what's the first decision that an organization is faced with when it falls victim to a ransomware attack? And I think it's, do I pay a ransom, right? So one of the first things that any organization notices when it attempts to open any document is that its system has been encrypted. It's we'll stay on the one side, thank you. Its system has been encrypted, it's been locked out, and immediately a ransom note pops up on the screen. The note will typically say something along the lines of, all of your files have been encrypted and downloaded. Don't try to decrypt them because you'll likely damage them. And if you don't pay X amount by X date, then your files will be uploaded onto the internet or otherwise corrupted. Now, with the threat of confidential information being widely distributed online, it's natural to consider simply paying the demand and hope that this problem just goes away. But there are two considerations that I want to briefly emphasize that may make you second guess whether it's worthwhile to do just that. Now, first, and we touched upon this briefly in the last presentation, think about who you'd be making the payment to. The perpetrator of a ransomware attack is a criminal. On a practical level, there may be little reason to believe that if you make the payment, your data will be restored, or that if you make the payment, the perpetrator will delete its copy of the data and not simply attempt to extort you with it again sometime in the future. Now, second, making the payment is illegal in many jurisdictions. For example, in the United States, the US Treasury Department has warned that companies victimized by ransomware attacks can face steep fines depending on who the ransom payments are being made to. Now, think about that. You're a victim of a ransomware attack and you may be the organization that's done something wrong and is fined. Well, the US and many other jurisdictions generally forbid organizations from facilitating or making payments to suspected terrorists or someone located or affiliated with a jurisdiction subject to comprehensive sanctions by the country. So it's just something to keep in mind when considering making those payments. Now, I'm going to switch gears now to discuss issues surrounding legal privilege. So far, I've covered that a ransomware attack requires victims to make important decisions in a very short period of time, and that there are various legal and practical issues in many circumstances that will weigh against seeking an early out by simply paying a ransomware demand. So next, you just have to figure out what's going on. So in order to carefully make considered decisions in these circumstances, many organizations correctly turn to cybersecurity and forensic experts to investigate the circumstances surrounding the attack and to determine whether and to what extent data was exfiltrated that is downloaded from the server. Well, while the involvement of these experts is certainly integral to developing a factual understanding of what's occurred, their findings and the communications that you may have with them are typically not covered by any legal privilege. And what I mean by legal privilege is the confidentiality that would attach to those documents or communications otherwise in order for them not to be compelled or brought before a court in the event of litigation. So it's very important to speak to a lawyer early in the process in order to understand what is privileged and what isn't. And that way you can manage your communications between experts and your lawyers accordingly in order to not be surprised later. What you definitely don't want is a situation where all of your communications with your experts, while you're in your most vulnerable moments in dealing with this crisis, to later become available to potential plaintiffs in a future lawsuit. So next, I'm going to discuss legal notice and reporting obligations. And many of you operate likely in jurisdictions that have mandatory breach reporting and notification requirements in the event of a data breach, including a ransomware attack. Now, in these jurisdictions, organizations that discover a ransomware attack involving personal information may have a legal duty to report details about the incident to applicable privacy regulators and to give notice about the incident to affected individuals. Now, some of these jurisdictions provide for specific timelines in which these communications have to happen, and others less helpfully require organizations to do it as soon as reasonably possible, or some other vague language like that. Now, the requirement to provide notice to individuals is typically triggered where there's a high risk of harm to individuals as a result of the attack, and this can arise in a variety of circumstances, such as where the attack involves payment information or other sensitive data. However, in certain other circumstances, there may not be a harm threshold before notification is required. And I'll just give you one example of that. In Ontario, Canada, where I live, custodians of health information are required to notify individuals whenever a breach involving personal health information has occurred, irrespective of whether that breach may be harmful to them. So while the contents of these communications may vary between jurisdictions, they generally include a description of what has occurred, the possible harms to individuals that may result, and steps that the individual can take in order to reduce the possible harm. So while the contents are fairly prescribed, there is some communication strategy that you could still apply to it in order to sort of soften the blow. And that's why it's obviously important to take care to make sure that those communications accomplish your objectives, but also satisfy legal requirements. And the last topic that I want to touch upon in my short presentation is managing the litigation risk. I want to briefly address the litigation risk and how it may affect your legal strategy in a ransomware attack. And what I mean by litigation risk is the risk that affected individuals, that is individuals impacted by a ransomware attack that involves their information, may commence actions or lawsuits seeking monetary damages against the company that have suffered a ransomware attack. So such actions would typically arise in, they would typically allege negligence, invasion of privacy, or a breach of contract, for example. And I'll just touch upon negligence as an example. So such claims arise when organizations responsible for protecting personal information are alleged to have either failed to comply with their legal duty of care, failed to notify individuals promptly, or to adequately respond to the breach. As a result of such conduct, plaintiffs in these lawsuits will allege that organizations caused them to suffer losses that the organization is liable to compensate them for. Now, fair consideration of litigation risk will often impact decision-making while dealing with a ransomware attack, and specifically those decisions surrounding communication strategy and risk mitigation that you may apply to the circumstance. And what I mean by, with respect to communication strategy, even where breach reporting and notification is not specifically required by statute, and that's what I discussed in an earlier section, it may nonetheless be advisable to do so in order to reduce the risk of litigation by impacted individuals. And in particular, notifying individuals soon after a breach is going to enable them to take steps to protect themselves, which will lessen the amount of damages that they may be able to recover. And of course, each breach and ransomware attack is going to be different, and this information that is impacted is going to be different. So it's very important to consider this carefully, especially where there's not a statutory obligation to notify, whether it might be worthwhile to do so in any event. And lastly, with respect to mitigation of risks, organizations may consider whether it's advisable or recommended, in addition to notifying individuals about a ransomware attack, to offer individuals some sort of assistance to protect themselves in the circumstances. Now, as you can imagine, this will vary based on the types of harms that arise with any given attack. But for example, where fraud or identity theft may be something to consider and a harm that's likely to occur, you may consider offering complimentary credit monitoring services or even identity theft insurance coverage in the circumstances. And this will go a long way to, again, reducing the risk of a claim brought against you, or if there is liability there, to reducing the ability of those individuals and plaintiffs to seek damages from you. So to conclude, I just want to emphasize that when managing the recovery from a ransomware attack, a lot has to happen, and it has to happen quickly. There's a lot of decisions to be made, as you can see, and those decisions are going to have a large impact on potential lawsuits down the road, regulatory inquiries, and otherwise. So if you take one thing away from my presentation today, it's that planning for a ransom attack before it occurs is the best way to ensure that your organization will make the correct decisions in these difficult circumstances. And part of that planning process really is developing that phone book, understanding the different jurisdictions that you may operate in and the different information that you may hold, and seeking advice proactively in order that when it's Christmas Eve, late at night, you're alerted to a ransomware attack, you know who you've got to call, and that everything can be dealt with swiftly and that you can make panicked decisions carefully. And with that said, I'm going to pass it on back to Ruben to introduce our next speaker.
All right, great, Mitch. Thank you very much. I think that the message was clear. A ransomware, from a legal perspective as well, is tricky business and will require a lot of planning from the organizations who fall victim to such an attack. All right, for our last speaker today, I welcome Christina Forsgård from Netprofile. Christina is a tech communications consultant and a crisis communications expert with a focus in cybercrime, crisis communications and management. She's also the architect of the H72 cyber crisis management model. Christina, I'm going to pass the floor to you. Take it away. Christina, you're muted.
Sorry, I muted myself before I started the presentation, but now you can see it and you can hear me, right? Well, brilliant, Simon and Mitch, and I'm really sort of glad that you set up the stage, because from my perspective, IT is just a matter of deciding what technology you use. It's easy stuff. Legal stuff, like Mitch said, different legal requirements and obligations are different in different countries, and of course in Europe we have GDPR, which makes it the H72 comes from there, because we have 72 hours to report any kind of breach incident if private information has been leaked or compromised. So definitely there's a huge urgency, and we don't have, or any company does not have, the time to start practicing what to do in a situation like ransomware. And from a communications point of view, it gets really, really complicated, as you know, because first of all, it's the communications within the crisis team. It must be multidisciplinary, so that we have the IT guys, we have the forensics there, and we have the legal guys, and we have communications people as well, to look at the complexity and how do we deal with the situation. So communications, at best, it brings in situational intelligence. And situational intelligence is understanding all the stakeholders who are involved in this, and different kinds of disciplines that we have to put together, different kinds of languages that we speak, whether it's IT language or legal language. It can be lawful, but it might be terribly awful. So we have to understand that when we are protecting the brand, brand is only what you see, what you say your brand is, but reputation is what others see of your brand. And reputation is something that you can lose in a matter of seconds, basically. So I just recently stumbled into or study that about over 60% of SME companies are bankrupt after 6 months of being attacked or breached. That's a huge number. It doesn't mean that they couldn't operate from a sort of IT perspective or legal perspective, but for reputational reasons. If you lose the trust of all your shareholders or stakeholders, you are not in business anymore. So the implications of not communicating efficiently and properly in these kind of situations are dramatic. And here you can see some of the stuff that I have put down for it. I have only one slide for you. I'm being very, very lean today. But the demand for transparency is huge. And it's now one of the things that is driving businesses around the world, because everyone wants to see that you are transparent. So that's the demand from outside. But in any kind of situation, like in ransomware situation, I think the best, well, Mitch talked about communication strategy. Of course, you have the legal stuff that you have to look into, but you can always look into your values, because if a lot of times they have asked, what should I do? And we'll look at the values and say, how about now putting those values in place? If respect is one of their values, let's see what respect means in this situation. So I'm just going to bring you some food for thought, like how the fundamental things that you have with your brand can help you to move around in any kind of situation. Of course, trust. Without trust, we don't have anything. And basically, if you lose trust, you lose your business, because you need trust with your employees and all the stakeholders around you. But the trust from the public, trust from the press, from the media, trust from governmental organizations or all the other parties involved, if you lose that, you have very limited options how to work. So when you are operating in normal times, it's all about reputational capital. That is a shield that you can build when everything is okay. So as much if you gather a lot of reputational capital, that means that you have a lot of trust. That gives you the one thing that you don't have in crisis: more time. And it also gives you access to, or maybe information or help that you wouldn't otherwise have. So definitely invest in reputational capital, because if you lose that, there are lots of consequences. But like in every single risk situation, but especially in ransomware situations, what makes them so heinous from communications point of view is the fact that usually your whole communications infrastructure is not operating. How do you communicate if you don't have the infrastructure to deal with all those stakeholders? And therefore, like in IT situations, you have to have separate plan Bs and already agreed plans. What if we don't have access to what we usually have? So you need to have those sort of emergency package where you open up and you have something that actually works, whatever has happened to your usually used infrastructure. And that is no small deal. It's a huge deal, because it all requires that you don't only have the infrastructure, but you have the communications materials that you have prepared for beforehand, like common templates that you know how to use, and you have sort of thought of different scenarios. And ransomware scenarios, they are not that separate from any other data breach or data problems that you might have. But definitely there are lots of things to discuss there separately. So what to say when you don't want to say everything, but you need to say enough. And from a legal standpoint, you need to say something that that is required to certain people. So you have to have those templates and Q&As and all of that there that you can sort of take out from the stack and start working on that. Like Mitch said, operating in a very tight time frame and under huge stress limits your creativity. You have no creativity and you don't even see the options that you have. So you need to have something prepared when you are able to think, and then you just take the playbook out and you start executing it the best way you can. And also, I would say that in every crisis situation, to have someone from outside is absolutely necessary, because that brings you room to breathe. And usually when I walk into a room or teams, like during the last year, different crisis teams meetings, it's all about breathing. And don't laugh at me. Seriously, breathing is something that we forget to do when we are under huge pressure and stress. And when I start the meeting, I always say that let's breathe together first. Laughing is also an option, but very seldom they want to laugh. But breathing is still sort of kosher in these situations, so I recommend it highly. It actually releases so much sort of a capital thinking brain power that you can actually have great talks with people, and you can share information and the information is understood. But of course, with all preparedness that you have, looking at the risks, it's always difficult. When I deal with the sort of painting the demons out there, usually many people are not ready to do that. So I hate to be the devil's advocate in many cases. I hate to be the person asking the difficult questions when things are okay. And usually we deny these things. We deny the fact that these would happen to us, but they will happen. And like Mitch said, it's just accident waiting to happen. So basically, look at the risks and prepare for those. And it's all about skills and routines, because you need to have a lot of skills on the table. So training and simulating harsh conditions are really the best way. And I can honestly tell that many decades ago, when I had my first crisis simulation as a communications person, it wasn't a cyber crisis then, but I knew it was simulation, and I was writing the press release. My hands were shaking, and I sort of still look into that period of time and say, yes, we are basically shaking, not anymore, but people are shaking. And even if they don't show it, they are shaking. So skills and routines help you in those situations, less shaking and more thinking and making wise decisions, because you need to be really up to making wise decisions. In terms of publicity, ransomware is something that, of course, sometimes you have to tell, but how you tell and when you tell and who you tell, a lot of times you can choose. I like to sort of point out something that we usually use as a sort of tactic, or you can call it strategy, but I call it tactic, because I think it's strategy is a bigger thing. But proactive responsibility. Proactivity is sort of tied with transparency demands of today, but being proactive towards your stakeholders shows that you care. And it's not only that you are responsible, but you feel that you are accountable. You are accountable of doing, and you are doing the right thing. So in the end of the day, doing the right thing is always a good start. And doing the right thing doesn't always mean that you have to open up the whole kimono and show everything to people, because yes, it's usually most of the time not possible, but it is your proactive responsibility that will eventually save you. So in my last case that we knew that was going to be public very soon, we wanted to be very proactive about it, because towards the press and towards all the stakeholders. So we basically took over the sort of the media in a way that we broke the news on our terms and not waiting, because the other choice would have been that they find it out before us and they write a story that is even worse for us. So proactivity is something that I always encourage, but of course communications is very situational. You always have to weigh of the pros and cons and legal consequences. And I am very happy that I've found a sort of a language to get a common language with legal persons, so that we can translate the legal stuff into something that people can understand and relate to and feel very empathetic towards your situation. So this is my presentation, and I thank you very much. And I'm really looking forward to answering your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christina. I think we've had very interesting perspectives from all of our speakers. I think for the different presentations, we have sort of heard one common theme, which is against ransomware you can prepare. You cannot avoid, but at least you can prepare. And it's something that, of course, every organization or company is really encouraged to do. I won't hog the floor too long. We only have like 15 minutes, and I've seen a few questions pop up in our Q&A box. So I suggest that we go through those questions and let our speakers answer them. So the first question that I see, because I've also seen that Simon has answered a bunch of them already in that Q&A field. So if people want to have those answers as well, please read in the Q&A box that you can find by doing a mouse over the bottom of your screen. But first question, perhaps, and it's addressed to everyone. So ransomware started with small amounts demanded, but evolved in large demands on businesses and governments. And beyond that, ransomware thieves are now known to do exfiltration of data and sale of it. Once they have it, they can mine it and sell it. Is there any way to deal with this? And does a ransomware attack today mean one must deal with it legally as a data breach? Anyone who wants to take a crack at that from our speakers?
Well, I'll just jump in and acknowledge it is obviously a very prevalent sort of data breach that we are dealing with ransomware. It is on the rise. To answer your last question first, is it a data breach and must it be dealt with a data breach? Certainly. In many cases. Now, what that means as far as funneling through the legal requirements and what that means for your organization in terms of how to deal with it, well, that will depend on the jurisdictions in which you operate and the laws that apply. Now, what that means, I think, for us more generally in terms of how we ought to deal with that as an industry, I think that the influx of it, the fact that it is so common, may feed into that communication strategy and the way that we speak around it in terms of communicating to affected individuals. And perhaps what we sometimes see is a little bit of this breach fatigue. Many of us have lots of emails and notifications that have come through. And if you want credit monitoring services, well, you just have to look at the last one that's offering them to you. and it seems we can laugh a little bit about that, except unfortunately, it really is just a reflection of how lucrative of an industry some have found this to be, and that it is on the rise.
Thanks. Yeah.
If someone encrypts all your data, it's pretty obvious. But if they, how do you know if they've also taken a copy first? They might not tell you, or they might tell you and not have done it. So you have to actually go and try and find out. And I think that's where all that, where you were talking about the, you know, the folks bringing in the techies to do the discovery of what happened and the diagnosis of the problem. And there was a word legal aspects for that. But, you know, I think it's a safe assumption that it's all been stolen, and you really have to go out of your way to prove that they didn't, I think.
Yes, that's the responsible way to do it.
All right. Perhaps another question. It is well known by now that cyber criminals are increasingly pushing victims to pay ransoms using cryptocurrencies. The resort to this practice is self-evident, as this practice enables cyber criminals to keep their anonymity. In this context, does the use of cryptocurrency change the approach of investigative authorities during investigations? If so, in what way is the investigation approach different? Anyone experienced with that?
I haven't dealt with that side because the forensics and the money trail falls in the category of basically police investigating that with the forensics guy, and those things they take a lot of time too. So when we are in the acute situation, we don't know a lot at that point. So I definitely don't know. I have no idea how they operate in that area. But of course, it's, you know, the white hats have now been quite nice as a team player here, because they have also sort of made it, they have sort of attacked back. And I think that is something that, you know, that's probably on the dark side, even though it's white hat operations. But, you know, it might be so that the crypto business might have some problems because they have been breached also. So it remains to be seen where we are heading at this in the future. All
right. Anyone else want to chime in? Just perhaps from my end, in my experience, the fact that the ransomware is paid through cryptocurrencies does not necessarily change the approach of law enforcement authorities. In my experience, they typically focus on their investigation on the entry points of where the perpetrators got in, and any outward-bound communications that they can find in log files, etc., to guide their own forensic investigation, basically. But that's where they sort of start out from. Of course, if the money trail is still clear and transparent, it will help the investigation, but it's definitely not the only channel of investigation that they'll follow. Mm. All right. Perhaps another one. Christina, this is again one for you. I see that someone asked you, you noted that one has to balance the need to communicate with all the legal considerations that need to be made, obviously. So is that also the right time to consider the information that one must give under Article 34 of the GDPR, where you communicate to your data subjects? Or is it something that you see separately?
No, that's when I talk about communications, it's the communications to the public and to outside stakeholders, but also communications within the crisis team. So definitely, yes, once we know that the shit has hit the fan, the IT guys, legal guys, and communications people, we are all in the same room and we are discussing all the issues, and legal will bring in their perspective. Forensics will tell, of course, that sort of evolves very, very quickly, but it's all about communicating between us. So definitely, we have to be very, very, if any private information has leaked, of course, we know that we have to act responsibly. So we talk with the legal guys and we look at the situation, what are the legal requirements, what we need to tell and how. But then with all love, lawful is sometimes very awful. So we take the legal jargon and we wrap it up in a way that it has empathy and understanding to the audience. So we address that very quickly. So yes, but it's also communication between the team who's operating and managing the whole crisis, because there's a lot of miscommunication all the time, and people don't really understand what somebody's saying. Especially the IT guys don't always realize that they are dropping something in the end of the sentence that sort of flips the whole thing around, and you have to sort of be able to tap into that and say, hey, what, when, what was the timestamp? And then the legal guys go, oh, really? Timestamp there. So we look at the situation in a very, very different the different disciplines are there, but we all have to be very alert. And also then, of course, communicate by what is required by law. But at least here in Finland, we also look at the legal stuff that goes to the ombudsman for GDPR requirements. We look at that from a communications point of view, even though there are lawyers and officials there at the other end who understand legal talk. But we look at it from a bit broader perspective, because we are all individuals.
Yeah, Mitch, you want to chime in? I see that you have something to add there.
Yeah, could you tell?
Of course, I've been throwing the ball at you.
Is there a lawyer that wants to say something? No way.
No way.
So look, the legal requirements will provide the ingredients of what needs to be said. And then it's always going to be an iterative approach, because it doesn't need to be said necessarily in one way. And there are ways that would advance your objectives, whether it be legal or public relations or frankly customer service, to say that same thing. So as long as it includes those components. Now, I just want to say, from a legal perspective, what I'm concerned with when I look at these communications are, number one, are you saying everything that needs to be said? And if you're altering the way that you say it, are you taking the substance out such that you're no longer really saying what you need to be saying? But then that's one element of it. Another element of it is that this communication can and likely will be evidence later on and will be used in another way. And there are certain other intricacies that, even though there's no requirement to say certain things, from a business standpoint, you might want to include certain things. And in different jurisdictions, those things may be treated differently. What I'm talking about is, for example, an apology.
Yeah.
You for many reasons, you might want to include an apology, and in many jurisdictions that will be fine. Lots of jurisdictions in lots of countries, you have legislation that specifically addresses the issue and says that an apology is not an admission that you've done something wrong and can't be used against you down the road. But that's not always the case. So again, you want to be very careful and look at those communications. And when we're addressing them from a legal perspective, we're not just looking at what the reporting or notification obligations might be in the law. We're looking forward as to what risks might we be opening up as a result of the communication.
Yeah, and I thank you, Mitch. And I'd like to add that it's sometimes just one word can be devastating. Wrong one. So we are not sending anything out before legal takes a look at it. But it's a cooperation. We have to find a common ground.
Yeah. I think we've been looking at how to clean up sort of after the incidents from a legal and a communication perspective. But Simon, perhaps a question for you. From a technical perspective, how do you clean up after a ransomware attack?
I think there's a difference between recovering your data and cleaning it up. So it's all been encrypted, let's say, and you've somehow got the key back. Now, some of the older original ransomware, the key was actually in the attack, so you had the key already. And so, with enough experts, you can realize, oh, there it is, and then you can recover your data. Otherwise, maybe you have to pay the money or something, or employ GCHQ to do some magic, But anyway, you got the key back, you can then unencrypt your data. So that's the sort of recovering it. But if you can't do that, you're not going to pay up or whatever, then you've got to go back to your backups. Now, get your data from the backup, might be a bit old, but you've got your data back. Now, obviously, the bad guys aren't entirely stupid, so they encrypt your backups as well. That's the first thing you would do in a more sophisticated attack, is go for the backup mechanism. So you might find you have to go back a long way. Or now, I think the famous Maersk one, they lucked out because they had a machine that was broken and offline, and therefore didn't get encrypted, and they could have recovered their systems from that one machine. They just were lucky. But let's suppose you somehow get that data back. The next question is that data still contaminated in some way? Does it have malware in it? And that's the sort of cleanup operation, which actually can be, if you haven't planned for it, really difficult. So imagine you've got a big system and you're going to go through every file and clean it in some way. But while you're doing that, if the system's still being used, then somebody over here might be touching some old files with the malware in, which then repropagates to the data you've cleaned up. So you think you've cleaned your system up, but as you were going, it was being reinfected. So actually, a sizable system, especially one that's like distributed around because people are working at home or whatever, is really, you've got to be ready and plan out how you're going to do that cleanup process as well. This is why it's all frighteningly difficult. You've got to be ready on all sorts of angles, getting your data back, cleaning up, all the legal side, all the comms that you're going to present to people. It's bad news, and lots of effort for us, but relatively simple for the bad guys in the scheme of things.
Can I add from a time perspective to Simon? That was brilliant. The recovery might take days or weeks or months. All of that from that perspective. But Mitch, I don't know how much legal perspective, how much time from legally, but in one case it took a year to sort of tie up the legal knots, but it took 2 years from communication side to recover the reputation that they were actually able to conduct their business. So I think that's a timeline.
Sorry, how much is your system a scene of crime? How much of your system is a scene of crime? Do you have to preserve it in order for the legal side to?
Yeah. Well, yeah.
So I can't
maybe
go
legal
system for a bit.
Well, yes. I mean, what you're dealing with is a system that constitutes evidence in many ways, and evidence of criminal activity. That's what you have. So you do have to preserve it. There's different obligations depending on the circumstances, and then also as far as time goes, remember we've got fairly strict timelines in which to report or provide notices depending on the particular laws that you have to comply with. But it really is an iterative process, and it's a constantly evolving process. We've got to say what we know within a reasonable amount of time, and then afterwards we might find out more information. In fact, we most certainly will find out more information, which triggers additional notification and supplementary reporting obligations. So that will continue after the fact. As well, the legal situation may differ. In fact, in my experience, we report to our regulatory bodies, and then there's questions. There's dialogue that goes on for several months afterwards, in which there's lots of communication that you want to be very strategic about. I mean, obviously, the best situation is where you answer the questions to satisfaction and your case is closed. You're also going to have many you send one of these notifications out to thousands of customers, and you're going to have a lot one by one that are responding with difficult questions. And you also, one thing that we work with from a communications perspective is preparing what are the common questions that we're going to get, and is the person that is going to be responsible for answering these questions, are they aware of how would we like them to answer those questions? What scripts can we provide them so that questions are answered consistently? And this is something that will continue throughout the life of breach recovery and remediation.
Speaking of time, I must be aware of it for this webinar as well. And I see that we are 4 minutes past already. I want to thank our speakers today because I think we had a brilliant session with a lot of interesting input. I think the main message is clear. A ransomware attack at a certain point will happen to any organization, but no matter how complicated it is, you can prepare for it. So everybody's warmly encouraged to do so. I want to thank everyone for your active participation. We had a lot of questions, which is always great. I didn't even have to refer to my own prepared questions, so that was excellent. I want to thank again the speakers for their very interesting contributions. So that's it for me. I'm going to move to Alessandro. Anything else you want to say to wrap up this session?
No, Ruben, thank you very much. It was, as you said, a really insightful and interesting session, and that they made it clear that you need experts from different sides and with different mindset that helps you in these kind of situations. And I would like to thank all the speakers, by the way, for being here and for the interaction that they had, and you, Ruben, in particular, for moderating and proposing also this session. I would like to thank also all our listeners of today for joining us, of course. And first of all, I didn't mention before that we were missing a speaker, unfortunately, today. That was our negotiator, Suzanne. Unfortunately, she had a very last-minute commitment, so she couldn't join today, but we will try to see if we can recover with her in the near future, hopefully. And the other thing that I wanted to mention is that PrivacyRules is going to organize, a series of events on criminal law and cybercrime, and we will have already another event on the 19th of May that will be on criminal investigation and in particular mobile phone evidence, and cloud evidence. So I really invite everyone to watch our next webinar. They can find it on our events page at PrivacyRules, www.privacyrules.com. So thank you all again. Thank all our speakers. It was a great session. So I look forward to meeting you again very, very soon. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you,
Bye, everyone.
Ruben, Alessandro, Mitch, and Simon. Bye-bye.
Bye then. Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.